The House just passed an insane amount of money for the Defense Department because exactly what they needed was more American dollars, apparently. So let's get into the technical details of this. The House has passed a massive bill to fund the Defense Department for fiscal year 2023, teeing up a final vote in the Senate in the coming days that would spend the $858 billion behemoth to President Joe Biden's desk, where he is expected to sign it. The new National Defense Authorization Act authorizes an $80 billion military spending increase over the 2022 bill and $118 billion more than what President Joe Biden, than when President Joe Biden took office in 2021. So we're adding about $100 billion to our military spending every year. Makes a lot of sense. The 2023 allocation is more than the combined military budgets of China, India, the United Kingdom, Russia, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and South Korea, according to the National Priorities Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. It's also more than the annual gross domestic product of countries including Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey based on United Nations figures. This is an insane amount of money to be spending on defense. And when you talk about, we need to protect the country, it's very important that we invest in defense. We are spending so much more than the next nations combined that this is unnecessary. This is exactly what we've been warning about. The military-industrial complex has led to lobbyists saying we need more and more defense spending. Those contracts go to things that are insane. We're overpaying for weapons. There have been studies done that show we are paying magnitudes of 3 times for what market values are for weapons in some of these contracts because the lobbyists are so effective in the defense industry. So let's get into some details of where this money ultimately goes and what kinds of wars and conflicts it ultimately funds. The post 9/11 wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan have taken a tremendous human toll on those countries. As of September 2021, an estimated 387,072 civilians in these countries have died violent deaths as a result of these wars. Those are a lot of civilian casualties. You would think for that amount of military spending, we would be able to be at least a little bit more precise about who we're targeting. But also, many people don't question why we're engaging in these wars in the first place. The United States military has a track record of intervening abroad in other countries, destabilizing them, leading violent coups that lead to civil wars that last for decades, most of the time to secure resources and to take down leaders who want to get in the way of US-based multinational corporations extracting their resources and exploiting their labor. So a really good use of money. More reporting from the Watson Institute at Brown University. People living in the war zones have been killed in their homes, in markets, and on roadways. They've been killed by bombs, bullets, fire, improvised explosive devices, and drones. Civilians die at checkpoints as they are run off the road by military vehicles, when they step on mines or cluster bombs, as they collect wood to tend to their fields, and when they are kidnapped and executed for purposes of revenge or intimidation. They are killed by the United States, by its allies, and by insurgents and sectarians in the civil wars spawned by the invasions. Now, there are some progressives who rejected this bill, and you might recognize some names on here: Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, Garcia, Jayapal Khanna, Barbara Lee, AOC, Omar, Mark Pocan, Katie Porter, Ayanna Pressley, Jamie Raskin, and Rashida Tlaib. Probably not surprising to see those names. And a tweet from Mondaire Jones sums up why a lot of these progressives decided to vote against the bill. He said, while working families are being crushed by inflation, we shouldn't be spending $45 billion more than the president requested in the NDAA, certainly not on top of an already bloated $800+ billion Pentagon budget full of lobbyist giveaways. I voted no. Now, this really is about the military-industrial complex. Let's look at this headline from Common Dreams. War industry celebrating Christmas early as House passes $858 billion NDAA. There's no justification to throw $858 billion at the Pentagon when we're told we can't afford child tax credit expansion, universal paid leave, or other basic human necessities, said the consumer advocacy group Public Citizen. End of story. Another tweet from Robert Reich said, $12 billion is the cost of expanding the child tax credit to the 19 million children who had not been able to receive the full benefits. $858 billion is the cost of the latest defense bill. Can you guess which one Congress claims it can't afford to fund? It's ridiculous how we pretend to have no money when it comes to helping our own people, but we can find billions of dollars when it comes to defense. It's because Congress has the power of the purse. They can vote to spend money. They can vote to bring new dollars into existence. All they need to do is pass legislation, and someone at the Treasury and at the Fed will hit buttons on their computers to appropriate the funds to the necessary places. So it's absurd that we're spending this much money on defense. And I would also offer to the people who say, we really need to spend this much money on defense because we have many enemies abroad. Why do we have enemies abroad? Because we've made a habit of intervening in other nations' affairs abroad. We've created those enemies. So Ben, I want to bring you in. What do you make of this $858 billion bill?
Perfect example of a corrupt system, a corrupt government, a corrupt budget. It's insane. It's insane when we should be drastically cutting our military budget every year because of the reasons you cited, because we have a bigger budget than the next 9 enormous nations combined, the next 9 biggest combined, because we do not need this amount of money to protect ourselves, because we don't need to give more money to Raytheon and to these defense contractors who make absurd, obscene profits every year, bigger and bigger. Part of what they claimed was that, they increased it beyond what Biden asked for because of inflation. You don't need to adjust it for inflation when it's already bloated beyond belief. These contractors can just lower their prices and still make billions of dollars in profit. It is unconscionable. There is no justification for it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to give more money than the president asked for, to increase it by $118 billion just in the last 2 years, when we should be going backwards. I've talked about this for a long time too. People say, we need to be ready, we need to be able to go and protect our interests around the world. Yes, we can do that for 1/5 of our military budget. And in fact, the less you spend on military, because we have such an obscene amount of nuclear weapons, there's an argument to be made that we are more of a deterrent. We are more scary when we have a smaller annual military budget, because then we just have slightly less options that are less scary. And we only have left, to some degree, more towards our scariest options, and that should scare the hell out of any enemy country. And so it's sort of a scarcity mindset that actually works in your benefit, but they'll never do it. And not just that, $850 billion does not include additional spending for our nuclear arsenal, and does not include the over $50 billion we've already spent for Ukraine aid, military assistance, and what we will be spending, obviously, many billions next year as well. So that's not even the full military expenditure. It's shameful when we have such urgent priorities at home, people struggling to put food on the table, to take care of their families, to protect themselves, to pay for healthcare. How does a nation justify that? It's gross. It's really disgusting.
Yeah, it took a lot of studying history for me to unlearn the propaganda that we're taught growing up, which is that the United States interests abroad are fighting for democracy and freedom for other nations abroad, where there's dictatorships or they're being held as colonies. And then when you actually look into what went down, you'll see that people became the Secretary of State and the head of the CIA, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, who were brothers who worked for a corporate law firm that represented United Fruit Company. And when there was a democratically elected leader in Guatemala who threatened to push the United States multinational corporations out because it was their land and their workers that were being exploited so the United States could take and sell cheap bananas, we decided to coup that guy. This is what this military spending has always gone to. It's gone to fighting corporate interests. So the military industrial complex is really driven by corporations lobbying our politicians and getting into public office. So that's enough getting angry about the military industrial complex.
Just one last idea on it before you wrap this segment. is, I just thought of this, and I think it's the only way that people will be able to be taken care of in this country. Every American should form an LLC and give it a military name. You could be Jessica Burbank Military Industries. I could be Ben Gleib Bomb Delivery Incorporated, and we will have money pouring into our bank accounts. It's a win-win. Plus, it just sounds badass, you know?
Yeah, Lockheed Burbank.
Lockheed Burbank, I like that.